Hello again, listeners. Community Radio Northern Beaches, 88.7, 90.3. Site streaming live around the world, www.rnb.org.au. Our topic today is skepticism and particular attitudes towards science. And we're going to be talking particularly about forthcoming conference of the Australian Skeptics Incorporated, a big 40th anniversary conference on in Sydney, 23-24 November at UTS, University of Technology, Sydney. Tim Mendham. Tim is the executive officer and the editor at Australian Skeptics Inc. of the magazine too, a quarterly magazine, The Skeptic, that's been being published now, I believe, for over 40 years. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us just before your big conference, Tim.
That's fine. That's my pleasure.
Tim, you've got quite a big event here. I'm wondering how you read the mood and temperature of anti-science and pseudoscience and denial and even conspiracy theories which are not based on evidence or good science at this point in time.
I wish they had actually abated now. Unfortunately, it looks like we are in a heavy time. I mean, COVID has obviously added a lot of pseudoscience and misinformation to the environment. Unfortunately, because of its imposition on everybody on the planet, it created a lot of people who were very upset, and therefore they had to find either some reason why they should not be affected by it or why those people who are making claims about it are wrong. That created a lot of things, a lot of conspiracy theories. The sovereign citizen movement took a big jump thanks to that, by people claiming they aren't required to follow the law. A lot of pseudo-medical theories put forward, all about not just the vaccines, but a whole range of things that were supposedly causing COVID, which also didn't exist at the same time, which is ironic. So it has been a particularly busy time. The skeptics in Australia have been around now for 44 years. We've seen a lot of claims, etc. Some things come and go. Some things disappear over the years, and we've played a role in making sure that that happens. But also there are some perennial ones, and a lot of the alternative medicine, a lot of quack cures. The anti-vax people have been around for a couple of hundred years, ever since vaccination was first invented or discovered. What is new is the way the messages are spread, and that means social media, online, all sorts of environments like that, and fellow travellers in the media, who are the general media, who are quite happy to spread misinformation. What happened in the past, of course, was if you wanted to spread a lie, you had to sort of either write a book or stick something in a newspaper or walk around and sort of yell from street corners. Nowadays, all that can be handled a lot more effectively, a lot more broadly, and a lot more quickly, thanks to social media, which means that it's very hard to keep on top of all the misinformation that's around. There's a lot of services that people sort of do and work very hard at sort of debunking or countering misinformation. But it's a big job, and I think it really is a bigger job than it ever has been, and certainly a more important job.
I wonder to what extent, too, now we're seeing this very much elevated at a political level, if you like, in the sense that we've now got a president-elect Trump, who's making a whole series of appointments. Now, we've been used in this era to talking about post-truth and lack of evidence-based approaches. And now it seems like we're getting an institutionalization, it seems, of a lot of this pseudoscientific, anti-scientific thinking. I'm looking at some of the appointments that Trump's been announcing, particularly in the health area, where he's got an anti-vaxxer, in the environment area and the climate area in particular, where he's got climate deniers, and he himself has referred it to as a hoax. Is this something that's showing up even here in Australia?
It is. It's not quite as dramatic as it might be in the US, but then not many things are. What we're seeing is obviously that division of people. It's no longer the case where, in many cases, in many situations anyway, where you can sit down and have a reasonable discussion. What's your case? What's my case? Let's discuss it, and let's either come to a conclusion or agree to disagree. Nowadays, it's almost like a dividing line, and you're on one side or the other, and never the twain shall meet. There's basically often no room for discussion, especially by the main practitioners, those who are the big proponents of all sorts of pseudoscience and pseudomedicine and generally strange theories. They're pushing this regardless of any circumstances, regardless of any argument against what they say. There's a lot of people who follow them and listen to them and might be influenced by them, but equally they might be interested in knowing what the real story is, not the fake news, if you like. And fake news is a term that's thrown up, I think, to defend a lot of nonsense.
Anti-vaccination, as I say, has been around a long time, but one would certainly have to say it's a pretty dominant strand in what's going on these days, not least in America, with the appointment of Robert Kennedy Jr., an avowed anti-vaxxer, to head up some of these health areas. But anti-vaccination, as I think you've alluded, is kind of an interesting version or theme in this whole pseudo-anti-science thing, because it's linked very much to a distrust of institutions, isn't it? In this case, we're talking about the Department of Health and the FDA. It's just reflecting a broader distrust of institutions and even conspiracy theories around that of Big Pharma.
Yes, that sort of trend might have been around a long time, I think, because even from the days of the Nixon government, where people suddenly started realizing that governments were lying to them and lying to them on a grand scale, people have started to have doubts, etc., and less obsequious, if you like, towards authorities, which is fair enough, often the case. I mean, sort of authorities do lie and they do conspire, nowhere near as effectively as a lot of the conspiracy theorists would suggest. But yes, it is a situation now where there's probably a greater mistrust, and it's a self-perpetuating situation where if someone says don't trust the science, that will just build up a whole atmosphere where nothing a scientist can say will be taken as worthwhile. There's a lot of expertise in science and scientists, but interestingly, a lot of the people will say, I don't trust scientists, they lie to me, part of the establishment, whatever. Science can't be relied upon. Here is my case, and here's a scientist who will endorse it. And that's the very strange situation you get, where sort of you rubbish it on one side, but need it as an imprimatur or some sort of support to your argument on the other side. So obviously, there's a scientist everywhere to endorse any case. You'll always find someone who will endorse the most outrageous cases. There are scientists who are promoters of UFOs. There are scientists who are anti-vaxxers. There are scientists of conspiracy theories. There are scientists you'll find somewhere on any sort of with claim, especially pseudoscientific, pseudomedical, paranormal claims. There's a certain irony in the distrust of science. It depends on whether that scientist is on your side or not, I think. But in many cases, if you just try and look at the facts, which is what science is about, and science is a process rather than a thing. Scientific method is about looking at the evidence, assessing the evidence, weighing it against other things, fine-tuning, moving on, changing, dumping, building on it, whatever. Science is an ongoing process. No scientist will tell you they're 100% sure, because there is no such thing as, you're pretty sure the sun's going to rise tomorrow, but you can't guarantee it. So scientists will say that anyone who says we're 100% sure on this particular case, you know that you're pretty much facing a pseudoscientist.
Yes, COVID certainly underlined that perhaps lack of understanding, if you like, in the broader community about the nature of the scientific method, and in particular, not only its safety checks and peer reviews and validation processes, but the lack of understanding that nothing is ever 100% proved and that things change with new data and uncertainties. And of course, that was a theme too that we also find in Austrand, is it, at the moment, which is actually skeptical of science itself and a fear of science itself. I'm thinking here of, the history we've had with genetically modified organisms, but it does seem that post-COVID, this fear about genetic and molecular biology has been overtaken by a fear of DNA manipulation because of this mRNA approach that was so successful in developing vaccines so quickly to counter COVID.
That's right. I mean, I think part of the problem with the COVID, the pandemic, and the response to it was for most people, the vast population, even the scientific population, they were dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, trying to figure out how to deal with it and what sort of action should be taken. And some of them were mistakes, they were wrong directions, they turned out to be well-meaning, but it didn't exactly work. So there was a mood there that usually almost suggests that the scientists don't know what they're talking about. They do, because they're working towards a solution. They might not have had it in the first few days or even the first few months. Also, the actions that were taken were impinging on people, locking them away, saying you can't sort of do this, you can't do that. And therefore, there was those two things, uncertainty and a feeling of being put upon. That therefore created a lot of distrust and distaste for the authorities, which means the scientists as much as the government bodies and that sort of thing, which means that people then started distrusting what the scientists were saying, and a general distrust of science and science results, etc., even in areas which are totally unlinked to the COVID, the pandemic. And so you just ended up with this anti-science. If a scientist says it must be a lie or it must be wrong. And that's so blanket a statement that it's obviously fraught with problems. We've got a session on our convention next week about, we're calling it 15 Minutes of Infamy, in which we've got a panel of scientists, especially those involved in COVID, including one who actually went to Wuhan, They talk about what happened to them and how they got put in the spotlight, and not a very pleasant spotlight at all. Some people got, serious threats against them, that sort of thing, and how they managed it and how they sort of, responded to it and what lessons they might have learned from it. But this is like anyone who makes a statement, including us, the skeptics, makes a statement that might be debunking a pet theory of a pseudoscience thing, is then attacked personally. Not just the idea, it's the person. For a science thing, it's not just the scientific theory, scientific discoveries, etc. It's the scientist. And when scientists are being attacked just because they're saying something you don't agree with, or who is perhaps debunking something you hold firmly in your heart, that is a terrible situation to be in. It's very dangerous, obviously. And you have had people, scientists assaulted, I presume killed as well. It's a sad situation when a disagreement that you might have over a table or something where you're talking different theories suddenly becomes a death threat. I don't see many scientists making death threats against the proponents of alternative medicine or pseudoscientific thinking, but you see it a lot the other way.
Our guest here on Innovation Talk Community Radio Northern Beaches is Tim Mendham, who's the executive officer and the editor with Australian Skeptics of the Skeptic Quarterly magazine. And Tim, as we've just been discussing, there's an actual fear and an aggression towards scientists and a distrust of science. And yet there is evidence too at the other end of the scale, when we look at pseudoscience, that a lot of science is actually exploited, for commercial reasons, and misrepresents the findings in the sense of the positivities. I'm thinking about, publishing results that are preliminary, or publishing results that are not peer reviewed, and you get good science at base, which is then taken and commercialized in a whole range of products, maybe in alternative medicines. For example, in the microbiome area, the proliferation of all the probiotic bug things, none of that's got scientific evidence behind it, has it? Even things like cancer therapies, immunotherapy.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a problem with sort of most areas anyway. So most good ideas often get commercialized by someone, and as soon as you add a profit motive, you might add an extra element which is sort of not necessarily conducive to open discussion. The thing is about, that you find with the peer review system, where someone publishes a paper and it's supposedly checked beforehand by experts to see if it stands up, and then it gets published. Other people then criticize it, and some people try to replicate the results and see if that works out. It's a fraud system. It's not perfect by any means, but it's probably the best you can do. Then you have the elements of predatory publishers who'll publish anything, often for a fee. They have no standing in the scientific community, but some of the publications, even the decent publications, are keen to publish some more of the outrageous or controversial findings, because it's good for them, good for their publication. So that's a commercial interest there, even in the scientific publishing. And a good idea, whether it's finding money to research good ideas is hard to come by. Most governments in the world put money up for grants, etc. There's a lot of competition for them. The grant recipients will always say they never have enough and they like to do more, and we need to do more research, etc. So it's understandable they might be looking at other sources for funding. And then you've got to make sure that external funding is not influencing the results of what you're finding. It does. It happens. We had the same situation with tobacco and smoking, nicotine, being researched and funded by the cigarette companies. So that was fraught with problems. But I mean, overall, the scientific method is about reviewing what everyone says, and you put it up there, and other people will try and bring it down, or prove it, or often disprove it. And it's pretty hard world out there, a lot in the scientific theory world. The interesting thing is we know what's going on, largely. The whole point about science is they make it public, certainly to their fellow experts in a particular field, but generally as well. And therefore, there's a better transparency of science than a lot of the other areas. You go onto a website for an alternative Q and you get a lot of nice words. They sound sciencey, but they don't make sense, and they do very little at substantiating their claims, really, in a strictly scientific sense. They'll just make claims and they sound nice. There's no transparency there, even though they'll claim huge success. So when they start claiming things like curing cancer, that's when you really know you're in dicey ground. You can't advertise you'll cure cancer. You can treat it, but as for curing cancer, that's a totally different thing. But I've seen many alternative practitioners say you can cure cancer. Gosh, you are making a pretty outrageous statement when you make that thing. There's a difference there between the sort of transparency, the sort of action science is, hopefully, in an ideal world, self-correcting, certainly self-assessing, or each other assess each other's work. You find that in the alternative field, psychic field, paranormal field, a lot of things, the individuals don't like criticising other practitioners, even when they're talking rubbish.
At some ends of the spectrum, like alternative medicine, it can be quite seductive, can't it, for various reasons, even though there's perhaps not a lot of evidence, scientific evidence to back it up. For example, I believe, you give out what you call a Skeptics Bent Spoon Award each year, and I believe that last year you gave the award to the Cancer Council of WA for promoting pseudosciences with alternative therapies, Reiki and reflexology. These alternative things, Reiki, homeopathy, reflexology, they're not sold as perhaps totally alternative, are they? They're sort of sold and insinuated as compliments. They don't necessarily rely, do they, on putting science down as so much as just trying to talk up something where there isn't much evidence, and hence pretty seductive?
There's certainly a feel-good factor in a lot of the things that are being put forward. I have to actually correct you there. The Cancer Council of WA is a nomination for this year. They're a pretty good candidate for the award. What they have been espousing is they offer this Reiki, especially. Reiki is a system where you just move your hands over someone's body and it's supposed to be balancing your energy and that sort of stuff. A lot of medical claims are made for it, actual things where you can assess illnesses and that sort of stuff and cure illnesses. But the Cancer Council is stressing, it just makes people feel good, makes them relaxed, etc. Well, there's a lot of things that can make you feel good. You can have a massage, which is one of the things the Cancer Council offers as well. Yeah, but you wouldn't offer people opioids because they make you feel good. Reiki is perhaps not an opioid, but the trouble is it opens a door to a lot of this Reiki treatment that the Cancer Council is offering, which is someone moving their hands and balancing their energy, and it's totally debunked and absolutely no foundation to it whatsoever. Even the Cancer Council in New South Wales says there's nothing there to say it works. But if all they're saying is that it makes you feel good, well, that's to me is a danger, because you're giving it an imprimatur, you're giving it a sign-off that makes it seem correct, but it's not. But of course, the practitioners will say, look, the Cancer Council recommends this, therefore you should come along to a treatment of Reiki every week for the next year, and we'll balance your energies and that sort of stuff, and we'll take your money, and we'll tell you that you're being cured of all your illnesses. And of course, you won't need to go to see a doctor or a chemotherapist or anything like that. You just come to us because we're the cure-all. And you came to us via the Cancer Council. That's where we see the danger of that sort of thing, is that well-meaning people, and they are well-meaning, I've got no beef against that, supporting a pseudoscience and a dangerous pseudosciences to boot. It is an uphill battle, and there's a lot of well-meaning people out there who probably thoroughly believe what they're saying, but when there's no scientific basis to them, that you've just got to say that, yes, thank you, next. We've got a challenge out to people, $100,000 challenge for people who can prove a particular paranormal skill that they have, whether it's sort of water divining or psychic powers or miracle cures or free energy machines and all that sort of stuff. And we've had that out for 44 years. And so far, no one's won it because they really can't do what they say they can do under scientific conditions, under vague conditions where everything's nice, etc. It might look like they're doing it, but really they're.
But just pursuing that line of thought, I mean, the wellness industry itself is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry, which seems to be premised, I'm not sure necessarily so much as anti-science, is it? It seems to be moving again towards, well, conspiracy, but it seems to want to question the whole sort of modern lifestyle and wants people to embrace what they try to sell and commoditize, and certainly through influencers, natural lifestyles. They want you to just go natural, as it were, and say you'll never need a doctor or a medicine again. So it's got an element of distrust. But again, there's no scientific basis for this, is there?
Going natural, being healthy, eating good food, exercising, etc., is not a bad thing at all. You can do that. But it's when it comes to actually treating chronic conditions and clinical conditions and that sort of stuff, that's when you really need someone who knows their stuff, and it's not just talking nice sounding words and you're throwing in a lot of sciencey sounding words. You'll hear the term quantum used a lot without any sort of sense of what it actually means, but it sounds good. As you said, it's a big industry. People are criticizing the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma. The wellness industry is $1 trillion industry plus. You keep going, it's worth a hell of a lot of money, and there's a lot of big companies and big people involved, a lot of big claims as well. So don't see it as the alternative as this nice little old practitioner with granny with a herbal cure. There's a lot of big operators out there who are definitely sort of shonky and know they're shonky, and yet they're still practicing. A lot of people who are smaller fry, if you like, who actually definitely believe it and doing it out of the goodness of their heart or for a small
this seems to be this wellness school, but at the extremes that it seems to go to sometimes, that you just step away from all this modernity and medicines and public health and, get back to detoxing, just clean your body out of the dirty world. Basically, it seems to throw a lot back on the individual person to live the wellness lifestyle and look after themselves, and to do it without any recourse to science or institutions or public health. Or
nothing wrong with trying to lead a healthy lifestyle, but don't believe it's going to be, you'll never be struck down with a disease or anything. I mean, you look at what's happening with places where there are this sort of return to nature, environment, and that sort of thing, in the northern part of New South Wales, and part of the northern beaches as well, even. And the cases of vaccine preventable diseases is growing. The biggest centre of whooping cough disease in Australia, certainly in New South Wales, is in that Byron Bay area of people returning to nature, because they're rejecting vaccination as an evil part of science. And yet they're then suffering from the effects of not being protected against it, and they're hurting other people at the same time. It's not necessarily a protection against the ills of the world to say, I'll eat only fruit and I'll exercise and I'll live in a tree. It's all well and good. Go ahead, do it. But then you've got to be prepared to pay the price for that. And a lot of that price means you're not picking up on some of the benefits you could be getting out of modern medicine, etc., and you're just throwing it away. I mean, cavemen didn't live a long time individually, and they led healthy lives. And they eat natural food and all that sort of thing, and they certainly exercised a lot. But people nowadays live a lot longer than they did even a few hundred years ago. So there are some benefits we're seeing from science, most definitely, but people ignore those and return to nature.
A lot of podcasters are very influential in a lot of these fields that we've been discussing: alternative medicine, wellness. These are not necessarily things that are directly anti-science. And in fact, some of them seem to want to, as I think alluded before, want to actually claim that they're drawing on the latest science and technology, don't they? For example, I'm thinking about this whole bundle of activity that tries to tell you that as an individual, if you take some of these new therapies and treatments, you can become not only a well person, but become a much, much better person and fulfill the sort of personal opportunities that you want. I'm thinking of anti-aging and smart drugs and things like this. Again, it's kind of perplexing because they do invoke science, and yet is there evidence to support what they're doing?
It depends on the topic. I mean, people are definitely after easy answers. Take a pill, or take a herb, or take a mixture of something, and I'll be better, etc. As I said, the age-old sort of line is that what happens to alternative medicine when it's been proved to be correct? Well, it becomes medicine. And a lot of medicine comes from herbal or organic backgrounds and plants and that sort of stuff. Sure, and it takes the science to pull out the active ingredient and then to use that for the benefit of people. So if an alternative medicine is doing good, and it can be proved that it is that is doing good, then by all means, show it. And there's enough people out there who would like to make a buck out of it. It'll get incorporated into medicine if it works. And that's the way medicine, that's the way science works. It incorporates ideas from everywhere, but they have to be shown to work. The skeptic's motto is prove it. Basically, just you make a claim, your claim, you prove it. And if you can't prove it, well, there's perhaps not much substantiation to your claim. And then people shy away from that. If I try and prove it, I'm in a foreign environment. I'm sort of under the sway of biased people. But in our challenge, we say, let's work on a test together where we're both happy with a test, and it's a fair test. And people still shy away from it.
These sort of underlying themes, I think, not so much, I suppose they are anti-science in a sense, but they're trying to pursue almost different values, aren't they? Where I think you made some reference of sovereign citizenship and medical freedom. What are these sort of concepts in the health domain that, in a sense, stand apart from, or might even be a reflection of attitudes towards science, not good ones?
Yeah, I mean, so you end up with a situation where everybody is an expert. I do my own research, as people say, which means they hop onto Google for 5 minutes and they find something which supports their own biases, etc. So, they sit in a silo or go down a rabbit hole, if you like, and they see a lot of things which make them feel good and give them support. But so, and people say, well, I've studied this, on Google for 5 minutes, so therefore I know more about it than someone who studied it for 20 years. Because they're a scientist and they're obviously out to try and get me, whereas I'm an honest human being who's just looked up a site, which it might be a dishonest site, but never mind. And there's that attitude towards expertise, towards knowledge, towards authority in a way, which is understandably people get upset about that. But yeah, someone who knows what they're talking about is worth listening to, rather than someone who just read a pamphlet they got on the street, or a few paragraphs on Wikipedia.
Our discussion here on Innovation Talk Radio Northern Beaches with Tim Mendham from Australian Skeptic. And we're talking about the Skepticon conference, 23-24 November at the UTS. Your program and your approach too, I guess, as an organization, does put a lot of time and energy into a strategy to combat a lot of this misinformation and disinformation. For example, you're featuring a couple of big sessions with two big names in science communication, Robin Williams and Karl Kruszelnicki. The idea presumably behind all of that is that a lot of these people that subscribe to some of the things we've been talking about, which are not well scientifically based or even anti-science, are misinformed. And that somehow, if we get better information out to them, they're going to change their minds.
I think it's a hope that underpins a lot of what we do. My personal thing is you have to put out as much information as you can and as often as you can. People like Dr. Karl and Robin Williams, etc., are very, very good at doing that, and they have avenues in which they can do it. There's a lot of other people, scientists working in particular fields, who might be a bit shy of communicating what they do to the general public, but it's something that we have to do. And whether you're being reactive in reacting to misinformation or disinformation, which is lying, misinformation is just stuff which is wrong, disinformation is active lying and spreading falsehoods, or whether you try and get in before and you create a situation, our purpose, our raison d'etre, if you like, of the Australian Skeptics is not necessarily to always be a debunking answer, because that's a hiding to nothing in many cases. It's also to create an environment of critical thinking, where people, rather than just mug and jug, someone tells you something and you believe it, is that you look at the information you're getting, you assess the information you're getting, and from a critical perspective. I mean, we do this every day. We follow this procedure. You go out and buy a fridge, and you look around the shops, you look at the price, you look at the size of it, you look at you check out some other reviews of it, which is like peer review in a scientific term. Then you see if it can be delivered to me, how long it's going to last, etc. You do a lot of research on buying a fridge. People probably do more research on buying a fridge than they would on choosing an alternative medicine. And that's the problem, that's critical thinking. You're critical thinking, buying a fridge, buying a car, how do I get to work? How do I do all sorts of things? You apply critical thinking when you do that every day. You should apply the same thinking to other areas, whether it's...
Both of those gentlemen and presenters are very well known and have been for years operating in, if you like, mainstream media. But surely the huge impact that the social media is having, particularly of podcasters, influencers, who are appealing to siloed audiences on the basis of post-truth and identity and emotion and fear. What sort of strategy can possibly try to turn around people where their commitment to these beliefs is so deep-seated, emotional, and even psychological?
It's very hard, because when you sort of criticize or debunk a favoured sort of philosophy or claim, people feel you're attacking them. Something skeptics have to be aware of, and something skeptics sort of discuss quite a lot, is how to approach people, that you don't attack the person, or you shouldn't attack the person. Although, the practitioners, the people who are making a lot of money, I don't mind attacking them. But the followers, the people who are the patients, if you like, of alternative medicine, the members of the public who just want to believe or want something to believe in, that's the way that you can talk to people like that, and you can sort of show them, this is the technique you should use to assess a claim. And you don't just do it because the person's nice. You have to sort of look at the claims and the evidence behind it. And if there's no evidence behind it, you think, well, it might not be something, would not be worthwhile following. So it's a hard thing to do.
All strength to your arm. And we've been speaking here on Innovation Talk Radio Northern Beaches with Tim Mendham, who's the Executive Officer at Australian Skeptics Inc. and the editor of their quarterly magazine, The Skeptic, that's been operating now for 40 odd years. And we've been talking in particular around the event that they've got, their national conference, 23-24 November at UTS. Thank you very much, Tim, for taking the time to talk to us about this very complex and often very troubling area of pseudoscience, anti-science, and what have you. Wish you all the best with your conference coming up, and thank you.
Thank you very much.